Okay, everyone, I'm getting my plug-in ready. Okay, if this works, I hope it works because I try my best to plug in all my equipment.
It's specifically I'm going to get on autism spectrum.
Okay, I'm going to do this real quick
I'm not sure if it's just the child in general.
because in case it tries to fall, I'll have it on widescreen.
Their son went up and went through their program. I mean, living on his own now, whole job on his own. I mean, she said it was just
And I've
incredible.
heard that there's a waiting list for these kids who will get through with this program. They know they're just ready to work. They want to work.
Right, right. But yeah, anything, I mean, we have friends that worked in special ed up there, and
They just really love that whole area.
so wonderful. A lot of opportunity.
Oh, yeah, it's far more than he would ever imagine.
Right,
The program's all established, it's been established for years. You know,
right.
so,
Yeah.
but I promised him, like, oh, you agree, I can't do that to him. This is his
Right,
second year.
right, right,
You know.
right,
So, I mean, I would do that to a child who won't care
right,
with his disability,
Right.
just caring stuff.
right, right.
If he failed the 12th grade because mama wanted to
Yeah.
leave, that just
Gotcha.
wouldn't go over with me.
Yeah, yeah.
But
Well, when do y'all have to make like official
he's
decisions?
already called the lady about the job, and he said, it's not that I don't want it, it's just circumstances, it's just, and she said the same thing. She
Right.
said, you know, whatever Cheryl said. She said, I already know your son's back.
Just know.
But you know, that's with kids, you know, so.
So, I mean, is she gonna kind of contact him when something else comes available?
He's gonna contact her as time gets closer to that point. But I showed him, I said, this is where I some hospital. I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
I mean, it's gonna be coming along.
Right, right, absolutely. Absolutely. We all have to go visit Mom and Daddy's church.
You know, I mean, Lisa's special, and Dad over here. Just want you to be independent and go through a good program and, you know, budget, live by yourself, you know, do things by yourself.
Right. Absolutely.
So, in some respects, he could make other mistakes in it.
Right. Right.
And Cindy Lassiter, his special education, when we moved here, he was in the 3rd grade.
Really?
She has a son named Jared. He's autistic. He went through the program. He graduated by June age.
Really?
That's what
I
I
missed that.
Yeah. She said, "See, I couldn't do
I think kids today tend to
She's trying to get some contact information so I can talk to the person that's in charge of the program. You know,
Right.
I'd like to go up there and meet them one-on-one and
Yeah,
sit down.
absolutely.
You know,
Just see, see it in action.
yeah. So she's trying to get all that fixed out.
Yeah.
Of course, we'll go, first part of November, going back up there because Bear going to the Bentonville Film Festival.
Oh, yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the red carpet.
Right,
That's the.
right. The big hoorah.
Yeah. And it's his birthday, so I couldn't wait for that to be back. And I've been in contact with the young lady that, I met her Brenda, and then we went around last week. Yeah, we were up there.
I know you will, but.
So they were both trying to get booked in the same hotel.
What?
We booked that. So we can visit.
Yeah.
Talk and
Hang out, we break.
Oh, yeah.
Let's look at. Sorry.
They talk. I was being registered, so I didn't get a job anywhere.
He could. Yeah.
He was being cheap.
Yeah.
And I told him, I said,
There's so many, I mean, there are new hospitals, there are.
just springing up everywhere. And businesses are springing up everywhere.
It's crazy.
Well,
How
and
much
I'm
it is.
telling him, I said, I was doing the same shit with Springfield, we can get.
There are, yeah, I mean, there are, I mean,
Because I
even
don't
other
wanna be
little
in all
towns.
this.
I mean, Case Springs, which is right I mean, that's just a baby. And it.
Max, Baker,
It's
I
got
got
a
one
small
on truck.
hotel
We got an air one on truck.
recently, you know, but it's close enough to Springdale and Rogers, but it
I don't know, like,
didn't
legit, I haven't got
that
that
far
there.
out, and.
Last Brenda just moved here from home. Peaceful and out small.
Temporary growth in that area is like more Fayetteville side, but it's just that, it's that small town feel still,
But yeah,
that you're close to,
yeah.
you're very close proximity to a lot of these, you know, Bella Vista's on the other side of Bentonville, and out, I mean, there's
She
a
just
lot
left
of
his tire at the house.
new
Like, we're
developments
distracted.
and stuff out that direction, but it's not very developed, not as developed yet.
Why didn't you bring some
It's
distraction in the
Bentonville.
first place?
Centerton is the other area that a lot of people
Well,
started kind of migrating to, you know, it's not, I mean, it's been village, but still just kind of out a little ways, but not, you know.
Larry, if we do decide to do this, so we'll fix the scale down.
Yeah,
We just have to do it, you know.
yeah.
That was the day before you were little and he was there. They bought that day?
Yeah.
It's a great area. It's not the circus that it is down here. It's a circus. The house like we live in would not cost what it, I mean, it's ridiculous. We looked at, before we left Greenbrier, before any of this was even a thought, we had started kind of looking to buy.
I heard about that.
Still renting an apartment, parcel. Was, I mean, not even flood, I mean, what we're paying right now, I mean, we can get twice the house. It's giving me some crazy, absolutely crazy. And I don't know why it's that way, yeah, yeah. It is. It is. It is absolutely nuts. I feel like we got my but it is, it's nuts.
That's unfortunate they all stay short of that color. Just isn't.
Ryan said one seat. He's just gonna come with it. I don't know how,
Just being silly kids.
it looks exactly the same, doesn't it? Yeah. It's different. It is. Steer, rocks. It feels right. Like, I didn't know what.
There's no.
Yeah.
And I'd be like you, I mean, I don't go with them. I don't even know if they're right set up.
My,
It doesn't seem, I didn't feel safe to me. Yeah.
Yelling at me.
Do they have a,
Not a nasty one.
Sorry.
well, anyway,
I go show you.
Yeah. Worried about your actions.
yeah.
No, actually, I mean, I'm. I learned for 6 weeks to go to police. I was like, no, we're gonna play yours out. I mean, we're gonna dance together, not just have 16 right now.
So which panel Susan and I are using?
I have it on pin. Yeah, the strings are down here on this wall. Is that me? I don't think that was me. It wasn't me.
Did you ever get a chance to see that I got
I
this?
did not.
by
Mom
mom?
got that for him today, he's kind of gave up the other ones.
I have not. Okay, so this is the actual. It's a little weird.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, I've seen the movie on Amazon Prime, but I haven't watched it.
But it looks
I
pretty
have
good.
read, yep.
It's a really good disability type of genre. You have to go inside the front cover and it shows you what it's about.
Okay. Really? Really?
It has over 20, almost 20
Well,
chapters.
that may be another connection.
I'll just like get the lovey-dovey off. Check it out. And then come back home.
Yeah.
And I
Do it.
just have to say.
Do it.
be on Monday.
You would do it.
Yes, I would.
Hey, I'll watch.
Hey,
Yeah.
does he pay?
Wow.
Really? And she said, I've gone to a 2-year, like, junior high.
That's what it's all about, isn't it? It's got one for y'all. That's
Someone turn the TV on, please.
I really just need you to sing. I really just need you to sing. Kenny was home. What time do you get back home? Who is it? Sing.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, y'all give Connor your attention. He's gonna get this thing rolling.
Have any prayer requests? This fine evening.
I'm out in South Carolina, so there's a can't go there.
And we want to pray for Beth Matthews. Miss Beth is going to have a bypass surgery. She went in today, and They did some tests and things, and she's gonna bypass surgery, maybe beginning of next week, I think. So you guys be praying for Miss Beth. She's also got a grandbaby coming any day, so that's a lot going on for their family.
Okay, y'all know who we're talking about, right? Becca?
No.
Becca's mom. Becca
Becca's not
Matthews,
having a baby.
her mom.
Becca is not the one having a baby.
And Sarah, her big sister.
Some of these kids probably thought that it was Becca.
I know her like it.
Okay, now you're the only one of them. Are you still on?
Hey, Bryson.
My sister's getting baptized.
Hey, everybody listen.
My sister's getting baptized Sunday.
My grandma just had a surgery yesterday.
How'd it go?
Right, she's doing good.
Yeah.
She got discharged.
We prayed for her this morning at staff meeting, so.
Oh, my sister had a baby today. Not only.
Not only. Elise, you look really good at having my baby today.
We're so glad. We really are.
I was about to say, at least.
Connor was like,
The whole whirlwind.
Yeah, how is she here?
she's really quick recovery. The baby is still in the hospital, but Elise said that she had pressed the button for the patient. She pressed the button.
Okay.
All right, guys, listen up. We're gonna have a prayer. Gotta be loud, Connor.
Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Dear God, thank you for this day. Just God, pray for tonight. As Dustin read the word from Genesis, God, that we hide on the cross and you preach the word. Thoroughly to us, God. Just get rid of all distractions in this room that we learn, that we be focused in on you and learn more about you. Just God, specifically pray for Beth Matthews that she has a heart bypass surgery next week. I also pray for all the prayer requests mentioned and all the praises. God, just forgive my sins where I've broken the present.
Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul. Worship His holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul.
tune to that song? That last one? What is it?
All good.
Okay, what's the name of the song?
I don't know.
Sweetie?
They're all great.
You know the name of it? Okay. Let's make sure. Yeah. Auld Lang Syne? Sign? Yeah. Auld Lang Syne. Okay. Yeah, that's the New Year's night song, right? Yeah. Right? You guys don't know this? Wow. Okay. All the acquaintances we forgot, and something. Okay.
So you're up
King, yeah, I know the song. I don't know the actual words. Nobody really does. But a group named King's Kaleidoscope redid that with those lyrics, and it's fantastic. I love those lyrics to that song. Okay, we're going to be in Genesis chapter 5. Let me get in the way up here. I'll teach you. You guys go ahead and just move your stuff up in this place. Okay. No, this one's fine. This is good. Genesis chapter 5, and we're going to go actually from Genesis 5:1 through 6:8. All right? We're not going to read all of it because it is what we refer to as a lineage. All right? Have you ever been reading through your Bible and you got to a section where it said, and Jehoshaphat begat Beelzebub, and Beelzebub begat Mahalalel? And you got to those, and you tried to read the words, and you're like, why is this in here? All right? Well, those lineages are actually quite important. And we're going to see the gospel in Genesis chapter 5. In Genesis chapter 5, you have a lineage that's leading into something pretty world-changing, we'll call it. Would you guys think that the flood was fairly world-changing? If that's no, just kind of ho-hum. Okay. So we have this lineage that's leading into that for a reason. And I actually was kind of nervous about teaching Genesis chapter 5 because I thought, how do you make a lineage engaging? Because I think all preaching should be engaging, right? Do you guys agree that we as preachers should be exciting and passionate about what we're teaching because we're teaching about God, and we should always be excited and passionate about God? So when you get to some of these more tedious places in the Bible, like when you get into Leviticus and you start going through all the sacrificial laws and things like that, there's some difficult passages. And you really kind of have to dig in to figure it out. So I'm going to tell you this. I'm going to head this up so far. I've loved teaching through Genesis so far. This is my favorite text so far. Because as I was studying this throughout the week, it was like every time that I picked up a commentary or I looked at the text and read through it several times before I really even settled on where I was going to start and stop. And I was thinking, it was like there was just this beautiful treasures everywhere in this text. Okay? You're going to see a type of writing called repetition. Hebrews used the mess out of repetition. They would repeat single words. They would repeat phrases. They would repeat ideas. They would use monotony, which is what we're going to see in this text. It's going to say one thing over and over and over, kind of the same way, but about different people. They're going to use that to point out 4 people to us in this text. All right, there's 4 people in Genesis chapter 5. And all 4 of these people are there to tell us about something about Genesis chapter 6 at the very beginning. And that's right before God sets Noah apart. All right? So, I want to read the first 4 verses because it kind of gives us a lead-in to what we're going to talk about. And then we're just going to do a quick overview, all right? It says, "This is the book of the generations of Adam. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. Male and female, he created them. And he blessed them and named the man when they were created. When Adam had lived 130 years, he fathered a son in his own likeness, after his image, and named him Seth." Okay, now listen. The Bible appears to have started over, doesn't it? Who were Adam and Eve's first sons? Cain and Abel. But we get to chapter 5, And because of chapter 4 and mainly because of chapter 4, Cain and Abel are no longer in the scenario. Why? You guys remember? Why? Because Abel's dead, so
Cain's banished.
he's no longer there. And Cain was banished, so he was separated. God was not going to bless Cain. Cain was under a curse. So you got Cain, the cursed son, out on his own, beginning really his own nation that's going to fight against God's people. And we'll see that. And then now you have Seth. All right, so we were introduced to this next son by the name of Seth here in this passage. It says, the days of Adam after he fathered Seth were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. Now, he makes mention here at the very beginning that Adam is distinct, and he's pointing back to all those things. So the first thing that this passage is doing is to say, well, I want you to look at Adam. God is still going to fulfill his promise to Adam. God still has a covenant with Adam, a promise to him that he's going to fulfill. And it's going to take place now through his son, Seth. And Seth's going to come into play later in the Bible, but Seth kind of disappears into this lineage. If you look at verse 4, we see Adam. It says the days of Adam after he fathered Seth were 800 years. Now he had already said Adam lived 300 years. He fathered a son to his own likeness. And so he lived 800 years. 800 plus 130? 930 years. Thus all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. So now we have, don't miss those words, and he died. They're going to be used over and over and over and over and over again. But they're going to be missing once. And when they're missing, it's so that you'll notice. Alright? So then we go to the next guy, we go to Seth. Alright, so we've got Adam and this Seth. And here's what it says about Seth. When Seth had lived 105 years, he fathered Enosh. Seth lived, after he fathered Enosh, 807 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. And then it goes through the same exact structure for the next 5 guys. You've got Adam, you've got Seth, you've got Enosh, you've got Kenan, you've got Mahalalel, and you've got Jared. All of those guys, it says the exact same thing. It says, and they lived, and it puts in a number of years. And then they had a kid, and the kid's name was, and it throws in the kid's name. And then they lived another 800 years. And they had more sons and daughters. And then they died. That's it. That's it. Now, first of all, what's one of the things we notice? People lived a whole lot longer then. Right? There's nothing weird about the language or anything that would make us think that they just did time different or anything like that. This is the same terminology that's used all the way through the Old Testament. The same idea of an actual day and night now. And there's a lot of theories as to why they live so long. And you see that as man grows more wicked, the longevity of their life begins to plummet down. And I think I can make the case that even to this day, we continue to plummet because of sin. Now, I may get pushback where people would say, yeah, but we live longer now than they did in the 50s. I would make the case that that's not true. All of those numbers are skewed because they don't factor in what? Abortion. Maybe the greatest injustice in all of history is happening right now in our generation. And because of sin, we see people who, at the youngest ages in all of history, are dying. I believe this will be 100 years from now. The act of abortion will be the thing that defines your generations and my generations. This is what we'll be known for. You go back 100 years, they're known for industry. You go back farther than that, they're known for reformations. You go back farther than that, they're known for so many different things throughout. They're known for the Crusades, or they're known, if you walk through history, there are these things that define, and we will be defined as the generations that took the lives of the most innocent in our society. And I think we can make the case that as man keeps falling into sin, people die at younger ages. I think you can make that case from Scripture. Now, that's not the point of this, but we see why at the very beginning of the fall of man they were living much longer. Okay? Alright, so then we have these different guys, and it walks through them. We have Enosh and Kenan and Mahalalel and Jared, and there's really nothing distinct about any of these guys. They lived for a while, then they had a boy, and then they lived for a while longer. They had more sons and daughters, and then they died. That's it. That's their story here in Genesis chapter 5. But the story changes when we get to verse 21. And there's this guy by the name of Enoch. And Enoch, it says, it starts out very similar. It says, when Enoch had lived 65 years, he fathered Methuselah. All right, this is starting out just like all of the other ones. But in verse 22, Enoch, where it would normally say Enoch lived another certain amount of years, it doesn't say that he lived. What does it say? He walked with God. So after they've used lived, in all of these differences, with Enoch, they changed the words. And the Hebrew writers are doing this so that you go, why did he change it? Why is this important that Enoch walked with God? So, Enoch walked with God, and then it kind of goes right back into what would normally happen. And after he fathered Methuselah 300 years, and had other sons and daughters, thus all the days of Enoch were 365 years. So it kind of feels like all that he changed was he walked with God. But then you look at the very next verse. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. In every other story, what does it say? And Adam did this, and then he died. So we have that they lived and they died. But when in Enoch's story, when lived and died are supposed to be there, he walked with God, and he walked with God, and then he was not. The same phrase is used for a guy by the name of Elijah in several hundred years from this. And Elijah was what? Go ahead.
Question.
Yeah.
It says that, does that mean like Adam and all didn't go to heaven?
No. We'll get there. No, they did. They did. Yes, they did. In Hebrews 11, you can go look at some of the fathers, and they were saved by faith in the exact same way that we were saved. But here's the distinction that it's making with Enoch. Okay? It's making the distinction between walking with God, and this is a gospel application. It's not saying that Enoch was necessarily more righteous or holy or anything like that. He's making this distinction that Enoch walked with God, and walking with God leads to life. I mean, that's what those verses are in there for. You're having the gospel right here in chapter 5. Why does he leave these things out? Because Enoch walked with God, and because of the grace of God, God says, you just come on. You just come on with me. You're walking with me now. You come on with me. And he says the same thing for Elijah one day, so many years later. All right, we're going to see the grace of God extended in this way. Okay, so he makes this promise right here in the middle that if you walk with God, it saves you from what? From death. Now, obviously, we know that it didn't save Adam from death, and it didn't save Noah from death ultimately, and it didn't save Methuselah from death, even though they outlived a really long time. It didn't save any of these other people from physical death, but the illustration here is that walking with God saves us from death. Now, did you add up the days on Enoch's life? Add up the days on Enoch's life. Somebody give me the number. 365 days. Is that a significant number? What is that? It's a year. It's an actual year. The reason this was 365 years is to draw our idea that this was a complete and full, in the same way that our calendar is 365 years, and then you roll back over into the next thing, you have a complete and full year. And so this is to point us to completeness in walking with God and being rescued from death. So we have a very gospel clear passage right there with this guy by the name of Enoch. But then it keeps going. Verse 25, when Methuselah had lived 187 years, he fathered Lamech. Methuselah lived after he fathered Lamech 782 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. Right? I mean, that's a pretty long life. But here is, and I think it's kind of building up to this Methuselah guy. I don't think he's distinct in any way because it doesn't distinguish him. But older and older and older and older. But here's the truth. No matter how long these guys lived, they died. The curse that was put on them in Adam was happening no matter how long they were living. And here's the statistics are pretty amazing. We all do, don't we? We understand that's the principle of Scripture, is that we die. And so he's pointing to that, because he goes right back into the same structure with Methuselah. But then there's the next guy, that there's a distinction. It's a guy by the name of Lamech. A guy by the name of Lamech. You probably haven't heard a lot of Sunday school messages on Lamech. All right? But here's what it says. When Lamech had when Lamech had lived 182 years, he fathered a son. Right back into where we're headed, right back into our lineages. And called his name Noah. And then it gives a description of Noah. So he pauses in the middle of everything that's going to say about Lamech and says, we need to focus in on Noah. So the text is drawing you in. Noah's going to be important. Now you guys are going, I know the story of Noah, okay? I know he's important. Listen, why? Called his name Noah, saying, out of the ground that the Lord has cursed, this one shall bring us relief from our work and from the painful toil of our hands. Then it jumps right back into the regular structure. Lamech lived after he fathered Noah 595 years, had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Lamech were 777 years. And what? And he died. All right? So here we have this guy by the name of Lamech. All right? Does that name sound familiar at all? Do you remember last week at the end of chapter 4? There was a different guy named Lamech. There was a different guy named Lamech, but he was one of the sons of Cain. He was one of the sons of that was cast out, and they began building this. And something really neat about that Lamech and this Lamech. They're both, first of all, at the ends of the lineage. Because when it goes into Noah in just a minute, it doesn't finish the lineage. It goes into a story of a flood. They're both at the very end of the lineage. And they're both the far extremes of the world in that moment. Lamech is holding, Lamech from Seth is holding his baby in his hands, this little Noah. And he says, I'm going to call you Noah because you are going to bring relief. You are going to bring rest. And so there's hope inside Lamech that God is going to fulfill a promise through this baby. You look at the other Lamech in chapter 4, and he was the one who took more wives than he was supposed to. He was the one who had murdered someone and was bragging about it and wrote a song about it. And he was the one that was cursed 7 times more than Cain. If you read that verse right there, it says, in verse 24, if Cain's revenge is 7-fold, then Lamech's is 77-fold. Now, do you notice something? Do you notice something in those? There's a number that's in both of those. Did you catch it? We see 7s, right? So that's how the Hebrew writers are going to draw your attention into these two guys. Hey, they have the same name. We're going to use the number 7 very distinctly in both of these verses. This Lamech is going to live 777 years. The other Lamech is going to be cursed 77 times as much as the 7 times Cain was cursed. All right? So there's just no way that anybody who had been reading this for the first time would have missed these two connections. And so it's painting this picture of the two Lamechs. These two guys, one represents the most vile in all of society, the one who is living in absolute defiance of God, and the other one represents the one that sees hope in a coming Savior. And to him, and that Savior was his little baby. It was Noah. And so he's setting us up for the story of the flood. We're walking through all of this, and then at the very beginning of chapter 6, the Bible paints the clearest picture of the condition of the world. And there are some weird verses in the first 4 verses of Genesis chapter 6. As far as difficult to understand with so many different views, these may be the hardest verses in all of Genesis, these 4 verses. So I'm going to tell you a couple options, and I'm going to tell you which ones I like the best. Okay? How's that sound? All right. So, Genesis chapter 6, it says, "When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives as they chose." All right, so let's stop right there. Now that's going to beg 2 questions. We see that there is, as men begin to multiply on the land, sin grows with them. That is a clear picture right here at the beginning. The more people there are, the more sin there is. Do you guys agree? Yes, you do. All right? So the more sin there is, the more frustrated God is.